Hey guys, this is Jerry with Senergy. I am here with Dr. Chase Faldmo, incredible practitioner we have at the Tennant Institute. Chase, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jerry?
I'm really well. Well, today we're going to be talking about something very intimate. And we do want to put some parental discretion is advised because some of this topic will not be suitable for children. But if with that, we're going to go ahead and start. Okay. So Dr. Faldmo has written an incredible book, this first book called The Healing Playbook, Non-Invasive Detox Secrets to Save Time, Money, and Resources. And if you haven't received your copy yet, go on Amazon. We'll supply the link to it on this email, but get this book. This is a really incredible book in regards to helping toxins out of the body, especially using with our devices as well,
Yeah.
right? And then they can also come see you for this at the Tennant Institute. Now he's got his latest book, which I have highlighted and bookmarked. It's the Healing Playbook, Biohacks of Intimacy. So we know that really across really the world, intimacy becomes a factor when it comes to the performance between couples and the connection with couples as well. And really, we don't know how incredible voltages when it comes to intimacy and how we can really help each other out with that part of it. Why did you decide to write this book?
So it's interesting is I see patients from everywhere and they will tell me everything. But I started to notice this trend, and this hit around 2020 time period. I started noticing more and more people came in with intimacy problems. And, classically, when people have intimacy problems, they usually generalize that it's just older age populations. But I started noticing actually not only older populations in greater amounts, but also younger and younger people were coming in with intimacy problems. And I thought, that's kind of funny. Why is this happening? And it all was happening for a reason. Now, I won't get into all the details today. If you read my book, you'll understand why. And some of the principles I talked to you about today, if you understand them, you'll know why people had intimacy problems after 2020. But the good news is when you know the why, you know what you can do to fix it. And so for different people, this intimacy problems came in the form of maybe things like erectile dysfunction, or they had decreased libido and sex drive. In other cases, they didn't have fulfilling intimacy like they did in the past, or some people have never had the fulfilling intimacy that they think their body has the potential to have. So this takes different forms for each person. What matters is there are solutions.
Yeah. And I think this is really a conversation that not a lot of people are comfortable with, but they really should be. I mean, we're dealing with two, and you'll talk about this a little later about the polarities, the feminine and masculine polarities, and exactly what happened when that is joined and connected together in unity and harmony. And I think it's such an important part of life that once that gets settled and attended to, other things seem to kind of run in place, or maybe things don't seem as matter as much because there's that intimacy, right? And since we are in the business of voltage, Dr. Falmo, and follow with Dr. Tennant's healing is voltage, how does voltage apply to intimacy?
Okay. So let me give you a breakdown of intimacy today to we know the physiology. So when it comes to intimacy, you got to understand there is a spiritual part of intimacy, there is an emotional part of intimacy, an emotional or mental part of intimacy, and there's also a physical part of intimacy. What I'm mostly going to be talking to you right now is the physical part of intimacy and how it works. So you're going to have to pardon my art here. I am not the greatest artist, but I can draw stick figures, thank goodness. So here is our little stick figure person. They seem like very happy people. All right. Well, they are right now, they're okay. But when it comes to intimacy, it starts with arousal. Now, when you have arousal, it all starts with the parasympathetic system. Your parasympathetic nerves are part of the autonomic nervous system that allows you to get erections for men, or for women, it allows blood flow to come into the erogenous zones. And what helps increase blood flow is our old friend, nitric oxide. Okay. So in intimacy, people get aroused, or they call it nowadays turned on. And when they get turned on, your parasympathetic system starts firing to increase blood flow to the genitals. And then what happens is you start to get nerve input in different parts of the body. So one of the areas that gets nerve input is this area around here. It's in these things called your spinal nerves. It's around the T10 to L2 range. You got a bunch of nerves that come here as stimulation occurs. And stimulation can occur not only in the genitals, there are various erogenous zones for different people, but you get nerve input or voltage going through these nerves, T10 to L2. You also get a bunch of nerves right here. They're called your S2 to S4 nerves. These are nerves that come right out of the sacrum, or other people call it the tailbone. So as intimacy continues, you get input there. And then finally, what occurs is something called orgasm. During orgasm, you have the contraction and relaxation of the muscles of the pelvic floor, which causes a good feeling for people. And during this contraction and during this orgasm, you have different parts of the brain light up. So for women, parts of the brain that light up include the amygdala, the anterior cingulate, cerebellum, hypothalamus, hippocampus, insula, nucleus accumbens, something called the periaqueductal gray, and then last but not least, we have the ventral lateral thalamus. We'll just do VLT.
I'm going to check your spelling.
All right. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So these are all the parts that fire in the brain for women. Now, for men, it's different. For men, you do have the cerebellum as well. You also have the hypothalamus. You also have the pons. You also have the periaqueductal gray. And you also have the ventrolateral thalamus. Okay. Now, when you understand the parts of the brain that light up during intimacy, you can use this to your advantage. And really, what we know about the nerves and we know about voltage is that there's two systems that use voltage. There's our muscle battery packs, and that's what we always learn about in all these calls in the conference. That source of voltage is always turned on. But then you also have your nerves. Your nerves use voltage as well. But the nerves are different. The nerves can turn on or off, whereas the muscle battery packs, they're constantly on. So when we know the areas and the nerves that respond to voltage, then we can use this knowledge and we can help enhance intimacy. Because when it comes to intimacy, one of the reasons that people have problems is that, one, they may not have enough voltage to be able to be intimate in the first place because they don't have enough energy and voltage for the nerves to go through this process. The other is that if you don't have enough voltage, you won't be able to have a better quality of intimacy and you won't be able to have it as often. And so there's people where they would like to be more intimate more often, but their body simply doesn't have the voltage to do it. When you know about the nerves, you can also tap into this to help enhance intimacy. And that's why you need to know about the voltage. Now, we know from a muscle battery pack perspective, for men, the genitals are on the stomach circuit, and for women, the genitals are on the spleen circuit. So that's an important thing we're going to get into later. But the big picture you got to know about this whole system is that all this requires voltage. Now, you can use this knowledge to be able to enhance it, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about today. So what were we going to say, Jerry?
So in regards to the voltage piece of it, I know for those who own a device, they're instructed to do these protocols that Dr. Tennant has mentioned. And a lot of that would be like the correcting the polarities And also, I know you'll go into the autonomic nervous system, but in regards to voltage, that's why exercise is so important when you're trying to get your muscle batteries charged. And if you don't exercise, or if you find yourself you don't have any exercise time, then the hand grips and foot plates are a good substitute for that, right? So in regards to voltage, is there a certain time or a certain amount of limit of someone that needs to do that voltage consistently through a daily basis?
Yeah, the obviously anytime you can do the protocol, that's going to raise voltage, and not only the muscle battery packs to help the spleen stomach circuit, but also it will help the nerves, especially when you're using the foot plates and hand grips.
Mm-hmm.
We know that a greater percentage that goes into the brain comes from the face, the hands, and the feet. So doing that basic recharge will help increase the voltage of the brain, which will help these various areas of the brain. But not only that, especially the one that's very important is autonomic reset. And the reason that autonomic reset's important, one more thing I got to include is during orgasm, you actually, it fires the sympathetic circuit. So one of the two things that help reset your autonomic nervous system is an autonomic reset using the biomodulator, but also orgasm. It will actually reset your autonomic system. The problem is when our day is that there's so many people walking around so stressed that they're in sympathetic dominance. And when they're in sympathetic dominance, you won't have enough voltage for orgasm to be able to occur. And the other problem is that for you to go into sympathetic part of orgasm, you also need to have your parasympathetic system firing properly. And the parasympathetic, one of the ways you can stimulate it is through that autonomic reset. Mm-hmm. And so the autonomic reset alone is very, very powerful for intimacy.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because we always try to tell when we have clients who are coupled and who do these protocols together, we do have them get into a much, almost like a very relaxing state, put on some nice music, and doing each other's autonomic nervous system reset and the connection and the bonding that happens. I can see how it could fuel the desire for intimacy. And it truly erases the day's stresses away with the kids and the bills and the finances and at work. It allows everything to kind of disappear so you can have that moment together as a couple.
Absolutely. And that's the cool thing about intimacy is when you know about these principles, like you're saying, doing the recharge together. Intimacy is the exchange of electrons, okay? Because you're going from one circuit to another, and that passes electrons and that raises voltage. So intimacy does raise voltage. Mm-hmm. And so the more voltage you have, the more quality and quantity of intimacy you'll be able to have.
That's really beautiful. I love that. In regards to you talked about the spine, right? The nerve endings in the spine. We do have something as one of our bonus protocols where they take the Y electrode and going down the spine, like starting from the hairline all the way down to the very bottom by the hip and by the tailbone. Is that something that could also regenerate I think you said it was a T10 and the
Yes.
T12? Yeah,
so the T10 to L2 range, that's going to be right at the bottom of the ribs. Uh-huh. And the sacral nerves are just above the butt crack. Okay. When you do that autonomic reset, or when you do that with the two large tissue electrode and you go from the neck all the way down to the butt crack, you are stimulating these nerves, and that will help raise the voltage in the area. There is another way you can do it. And so I talk a little bit about my book, but you can use the patches to help enhance intimacy. So this is going to be a case by case of what people can handle or what they need to do. But if you put the patches in these various areas, it can help. So one of the cool nerves that's involved, and you just talked about the parasympathetic system, is the vagus nerve. When you look at the vagus nerve puts input into various of these areas when it comes to intimacy. So if you can tap into the vagus nerve, this will help immensely. And one of the ways you can do it is it's the same location as where you do the autonomic reset on the side of the neck. You can also put patches there. So if you connect the patches to the biomodulator and you put the red patch on the left here and the black patch on the right, but again, you got to make sure you're right on the SCM muscle or kind of behind it. You don't want to go too far in front. But if you're right on that, you can run voltage in that area to help the vagus nerve, to help fire these various parts of the brain. But also, like you're saying, you can do the large tissue electrode, but you can also use the patches down here. So if I were to use the patches on the back, I would want to put the black patch on the left and the red patch on the right in this T10 to L2 area. To find that area, it's real easy. You just find the bottom of your ribs, and it's right at the bottom of your ribs, and you could put the patches right on each side of the spine. And then you can also put them in the sacrum area. So the sacrum is, again, that little triangle-shaped bone just above the butt crack. You put the black patch on the left, the red patch on the right, and you can run voltage in. So what's cool about this is that you can run the voltage through these areas before you're intimate. But also, interestingly, there is something called neuromuscular re-education. For some people's systems, they need extra help and boost. Mm-hmm. So some people, and again, this is going to be different for each couple. You got to be able to discuss with your spouse or your partner what feels comfortable. But for some people, you can actually run these patches during intimacy. And as you do stimulation to the genitals during intimacy, it's going to help fire these nerves. And in some cases, people absolutely need that. But in other cases, you can just use it before, because it might be real tricky with wires to be intimate. But if you're trying to retrain the body to help increase voltage and intimacy again, it might be something you need to do.
That's great. In your book, you talk about masculine and feminine polarity. Mm-hmm. What does that mean exactly?
So everything in this world has either masculine or feminine energy. You see it in ancient scripts and scriptures, you name it. But also, everything in this world just has masculine and feminine polarity. So you see this phenomenon in nature. And this phenomenon can apply to any relationship. If you're wanting more information on it, check out Tony Robbins' work. He talks a lot about masculine and feminine polarity. But every couple, one person will have more masculine energy, one person will have more feminine energy. If you can tap into your polarity, then you can make the opposite attract even stronger. So it's just like with intimacy, we know that there's a plus end of a genitals and a minus end. When they're opposite, that's what creates the attraction. The same thing can occur with the human body as you tap into more masculine and feminine polarity. And what's cool about that is you can use that through smell, you can use that through color. There are various ways to tap into it, but it's a very real thing.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned something about smell. You also mentioned in the book some oils that really enhance the attraction of the masculine polarity and the feminine polarity versus, I don't know, perfumes. And we know sometimes colognes and perfumes are somewhat toxic, or they can be, but something natural oils that you mentioned, would that help with the pulling in the feminine and the masculine?
Yes, it would. So I'll give you a little input into it. I talk a little bit about in the book, but there is something called pheromones that everyone has. So these pheromones are hormones that we produce, and it actually causes attraction. So some people think that attraction is only a visual thing. No, it's actually, people are attracted by smell. So they did this research study where they had a bunch of men sweat, and they took these shirts and they gave it to some women, and the women smelled the shirts. And for some women, some of the shirts smelled good, the other shirts smelled bad. But on the shirts that smelled good, when they looked at if they were to reproduce and have a baby, they actually found that the shirts that smelled good to the women, the children would have better genetic diversity to be strong. So unfortunately, a lot of artificial scents have come in, and they've actually used artificial pheromones. The problem with that is if you're using a scent that's not natural to you, you may not be attracting the right person. And so I'm not saying you can't use any scents at all, right? Like I'm not saying, oh, you can't use any deodorant, right? But like there are the more natural you can keep things and the lower scent, the better it is for your body and the better it is for attraction too. So you can use this law of polarity to understand nature. So let me give you an example. The polarity will also follow the chakras, or what we call the bioterminals. So an example is the liver circuit. The liver circuit has more masculine polarity. Well, when you think about men, we have our genitals that go out around the liver circuit. The bladder circuit also has more feminine polarity. And when you think about women, when a woman is pregnant, the bladder circuit is what you see the extension from the baby. And the emotions actually play a role into this too. And when you know about polarity, it makes sense with emotions. As a guy, I can tell you I have more anger. And we know anger resonates with the liver circuit. Whereas you could ask my wife, she feels more fear. Emotions like fear affect the bladder circuit. And so they are alternating circuits, actually. But when you know that, you can use different smells that resonate with different circuits as well as color. So just alone, like you could be intimate with a certain light on in the room with a certain color. And we know light and color are a frequency too that resonate with this. Then that also can enhance your intimacy. And I talk a little bit more about that in the book.
Yeah, you sure do. I wish we had 3 hours to talk to you about it because there was absolutely fascinating information about color, smell, even even the way the eyes, and you even give an exercise on how to use your eyes with that. And can you briefly go into what that exercise is?
Yeah. So basically, what happens is we know that there are 4 parasympathetic nerves. And the parasympathetic system, again, allows you to have arousal. And the day we're in, there's so much stress, there's so much sympathetic dominance that we need to turn on more parasympathetics. So one of your parasympathetic nerves is known as cranial nerve 3. And it helps your eyes look up and to the corner and down and helps them return to. So what's cool is that if you're to use like the basic recharge protocol while you're doing some of these eye exercises I mentioned in the book, it can help put voltage in that parasympathetic system. And with some of these parts of the brain, like the periaqueductal gray, both of those fire for both men and women during orgasm. What actually helps fire that part of the brain is this thing called cranial nerve 4, which helps your eyes do a certain movement pattern. So you can use these exercises for these eyes to help enhance intimacy. And there's this saying I have is motion is lotion. Basically, the more you use and move something, the more it enhances its voltage. So these nerves in our body, they're basically like muscles. When you can exercise and use them, you get them to be stronger. But when you don't use them, they lose their strength. And especially in our day, when people are looking at phones and screens all the time, we've lost some of the eye movement patterns that a lot of our ancestors had that helped them have such healthy nervous systems. So we need to get back to that.
That's true. Now, you did mention about the autonomic nervous system dealing with stress when it comes to intimacy. And you also talk about the level of emotions that people carry and how it can affect intimacy. Briefly talk about what do you mean by that?
Yeah, we know that anytime you get an emotional block, emotions act like magnets in one of 2 areas. They can get in our energy systems and our biofield, but they also get caught in some of the crystals in our body, which could include our bones and our teeth, but they also get caught in our nerves. So there's people that have had previous trauma in regards to like intimate parts of their body. And when that is stored as memory, it can affect intimacy. So what you need to do is you need to retune that emotion to being just a memory. When you do that, you still have the memory of what happened, but it no longer drains the voltage of certain energy systems. But also when you have a traumatic event has occurred and you are trying to be intimate and that traumatic event comes back in your mind again, it can affect intimacy. So when it comes to this, you need to address the emotional pattern.
Mm-hmm. And we do believe that the emotion is one of the 5 factors when it comes to why people go into a chronic state of illness, but also with intimacy. That's fascinating. When it comes to enhance the libido and the nerves, what is the best way to do that?
Okay, I already mentioned some of the patches earlier,
Mm-hmm.
which again, you can do both before intimacy or during intimacy. One thing I'll add to that is there are things you could do like pelvic floor exercises.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I mentioned during orgasm, there is the contraction and relaxation of the pelvic floor muscles. And that's what gives people the sensation of that pleasure. When you can use exercises to help strengthen the pelvic floor muscles, and I talk a little bit more about it in my book. But when it comes to intimacy, is it a marathon or is it a sprint?
Mm-hmm.
Answer is yes. It could be both in different circumstances. But when you can train the pelvic floor exercise, when you train the pelvic floor muscles properly, they'll have enough strength so you can have more powerful orgasms, but you can also be intimate more frequent. Because if the pelvic floor gets worn down too frequently, then what happens is you won't be able to have intimacy as often. We want to increase both the quality and quantity of intimacy. You can do that through the pelvic floor muscles. So for women, the vaginal probe that connects to the biomodulator works really well. You can use pelvic floor exercises, which the pelvic floor is if you are urinating and you stop your urination by holding your muscles by your genitals and you stop that urine flow, those are pelvic floor muscles. So you can use the vaginal probe connected to the biomodulator and you can use pelvic floor exercises. And doing this will create, again, this neuromuscular re-education to brain and body and can help the pelvic floor. But also there are other things you can do besides the patches. One of them I like is, we already mentioned autonomic reset, but you can sometimes use the large tissue electrode. I also like the pencil electrode, but there are certain parts of the ear you can use the pencil electrode on or a large tissue electrode on to help the vagus nerve. So one of them, if you can see my ear here,
Yeah.
is this thing called the tragus. This little triangular part of my ear, it's just to the front of it. There's a lot of vagus nerve input that goes there. The other part is inside the ear right here. This part of the ear, and then this part of the ear. So using the pencil electrode on these various parts of the ear will help that vagus nerve, which, as we know, as I mentioned earlier, fires different parts of the brain. And then using the transducer too. For both men and women, the cerebellum lights up during orgasm. So the cerebellum is right here. It's known as the little brain. It's found at the base of our skull. And you can use the transducer or the biomodulator. If you have the Pro, that works amazing because the Pro has the settings for either called D or G mode. In D or G mode, both of these resonate with the cerebellum. So you could do, I've done this test so many times where for those of you who haven't seen it, I do a finger to nose test. It's one of the ways you can test the cerebellum. And when people are off, like they see it, they feel it. And then you treat with the transducer right here for 30 seconds, the 30 to 60 seconds in either D or G mode. And it corrects almost every time.
Wow.
And that just shows you how powerful the voltage is correcting the cerebellum. But the cerebellum, we can get that firing more, you're going to increase orgasm potential. But also for women specifically, if you're going to use the vaginal probe with the Pro biomodulator, the mode that actually works really well is A mode. when you're using the biomodulator, if you just turn it up till you barely feel it, that's the ultimate level. But what's cool is that these patches I mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily have to use them before intimacy or during intimacy, but these pelvic floor exercises I talked about are relevant to both men and women. So you can patch up in these different places I discussed earlier, and you can do those pelvic floor exercises, and that's also going to increase. So the sky's the limit. Like I want to be able to give people options. I understand life is busy and you can't always do everything 100%. You got to find things that work for you. And what's cool about these principles in this system is that you can adapt it based on your needs.
That's true. And in the society of a one pill fix, it's really important to invest time in your partner. I do believe it's worth it. And almost to the point where we get so caught up with life, so caught up with responsibilities that we lost when we fell in love with them, with our significant other, and to talk about what is it that drew you to that person and why you fell in love with that person. So it just kind of sets the stage, if you will, for a beautiful experience that not only is good for intimacy, but overall health and voltage. And I can't think of a better way to increase my voltage than through intimacy. And all this may seem a little overwhelming, but I think as individuals into your investment in your partners, it's definitely worth it for sure. And I know, Dr. Faldmo, you also will be having an intimacy appointment there at the Tennant Institute. We'll provide the link down below. We also will be having the pencil electrode that you were speaking of. It gives directly into those spots you were pointing on the ear. We'll have those on the link as well at the bottom. And then also, your book is available on Amazon, and we'll provide the link directly to this. Now, do you want to give us a preview of your next book, or is that something that's still in infancy in your mind?
I have a lot of books right here. I just got to have time to be able to write them.
Okay.
So I'm going to be working on, might be one of my next books will be weight loss. And then I'll have some stuff for skin health. But I've got a lot to do, a lot of patients to see. So it's one of my projects. Just got to find more time.
Well, I can't wait for the next book. And again, if you want to follow Chase on his Instagram, it's Healing Playbook on Instagram. And what I love about that channel, Dr. Faldmo, is that you relate that everything has frequency. You talk about frequency on a sunflower. You talk about the frequency from the sound of the waves. I mean, we don't realize the amount of goodness and voltage that we can absorb by our surroundings if we just stop. And to do a little phrase, to smell the roses, right? But smell everything and feel everything. So just know that your postings are really beautiful, and your family, you showcase your beautiful family and that beautiful baby of yours as well. So thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for the commitment and the passion that you've given, not only just to us, our clients, and really the world. So we are crazy about you. Again, go to the Amazon, pick up his books. Dr. Faldmo, thank you for putting this all together in intimacy, and a lot of great, beautiful romances will come from this and improvement of life. So thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you, Jerry.
Take care.